this point in time, Armored Core no longer needs any introduction. Making its debut in Japan in 1997 for the PlayStation 1, this mecha-based series spawns 15 games and went on hiatus after Armored Core Verdict Day. 10 years after that game, and we finally have the next installment of the series with Armored Core 6. There has been a ton of hype with this title, making it easily the highest selling game in the whole series. Personally, I also believe it is long time coming, but was Armored Core 6 Fires of Rubicon actually worth the wait? When you start a new game, you're given a fairly quick opening cutscene and are thrown right into the game's tutorial. I played this game using a mouse and keyboard, which surprisingly felt very natural to control the mech. Having mouse control also helps immensely with aiming. Sadly though, I didn't see any sort of joystick option, which was a bit disappointing for me. Still, the controls were great and it felt great. As an Armored Core veteran, it was nice to see many of the series staples return, but don't expect this to be a one-to-one recreation of your favorite AC title. Ultimately, Armored Core 6 is its own title that reinvents the formula with notable new twists. For one, the game is still fast-paced, but nowhere near as twitchy as Armored Core 4 and For Answer was. You can't just quick boost forever or you'll run out of boost incredibly fast. However, one big change is how quickly you'll recharge your boost once you are on solid ground. I personally prefer this change as older AC titles, especially the PS2 ones, would sometimes require a very long time to recharge your boost. How weapons work has also seen a bit of a revamp in this game. For returning elements, you still have your shoulder weapons and your arm weapons. Melee weapons, however, work a bit differently here. Instead of having your blade using a bit of your boost meter, it now works on a completely separate cooldown. This definitely takes some time to get used to, but it isn't a problem later on. As a matter of fact, I ended up ditching the melee weapon entirely and switched over to a shotgun. The most fun I've had with this combat is going up against other ACs within the game. Other ACs can either be found in various missions or in a 1v1 fight in the arena. The arena is a returning feature that I always enjoyed going through, and it's just as fun here trying out various part combinations to see what works. Definitely a highlight within this game. Another big change you'll realize early on is the game's over-reliance on boss fights. Starting with the tutorial mission, you'll run into a military-grade helicopter and are expected to take it down. It seems like the Souls-like philosophy has also bled into Armored Core, but that's besides the point. This fight is particularly tough, but I found it to be ultimately a fun boss. Unfortunately, the rest of the bosses range from painfully mediocre to downright awful in cheap design. There is one fight in particular early on that nearly ruined the experience for me, but thankfully I was able to persevere. If you've played this game already, you know what I'm talking about. As expected for an Armored Core title, there is a ton of customization present here. Compared to prior games, many elements and stats have been simplified, so there are less variables that a player will need to pay attention to. There's also a ton of options when it comes to painting your mechs, adding decals, editing an emblem, and much more. For the part selection, there won't be a lot for the first 2 chapters, but it definitely opens up a ton once you get to chapter 3. Still, I did feel the overall part selection to be lacking. I wish there were more leg and arm parts to play around with. I have a strong feeling though that this will come in a future DLC. And speaking of those first 2 chapters, the game has a pretty rough opening. Unlike prior games like Armored Core 2 and 3 that had the game feel open early on with so many parts to choose from and various paths, the game has a very poor habit of drip feeding you more content. As mentioned before, only a handful of parts are available, and the game follows many Souls-like by front-loading the game with incredibly high difficulty. The arena also only adds new opponents once you reach certain points within the game, artificially limiting what a player can do early on. To be perfectly honest, the story is honestly pretty balls, which is nothing new for the series. Basically, you arrive on this planet called Rubicon looking to accomplish something given to you by your handler. You find a license with the name of Raven and take on missions from that point forward. Ultimately, you learn what Coral is and can decide on what route to ultimately take, but I just didn't care honestly. For a game that I completed in about 18 hours, it feels padded with poor pacing. It isn't until the last chapter where the game finally explains what you've been doing and where Coral fits into everything. For the missions themselves, they are pretty long, with many of them containing resupply points and checkpoints. I prefer the introduction to checkpoints, as prior Armored Core titles were basically one and done with missions. Many will contain a boss or 2 to fight, while others are a bit more involved with defense missions, escort missions, destroying all enemies, and whatever else the game can come up with. Missions also contain hidden parts, so be on the lookout for those. Multiplayer is also available in this game, but I only saw a handful of rooms during peak hours. Just like most of the drip-fed content, this is unlocked by the midway point of the game. As of launch, there is only PvP combat available, which is a bit of a disappointment. It would have been awesome to play this game co-op to help with some of the more difficult missions. It's a shame considering co-op has been in past Armored Core titles, so it's disappointing not to see this feature return. And once you beat the game, you can play the game again exploring a new path as well as replaying any mission that you've played previously. It's basically a new game plus with all of your parts and credits carrying over. It's a great way to get through some of those early game headaches without having to start all over, and a way to gain new parts not seen in your first playthrough. From a presentation standpoint, this is easily the best looking Armored Core game to date. That is to be expected, however, but I wasn't blown away or anything by the graphics. Thankfully, there is a photo mode to play around with, which is always a nice inclusion that should continue to become standard in every game. The voice acting is overall a mixed bag, with some solid voice work here and there, but also some downright poor performances. Alright, so just for the record, I always planned to review Armored Core 6 as I had pretty high expectations for the series returning. Once this game came out and I beat the game, however, I honestly lacked the motivation to make this review due to the toxic community FromSoft fans have become. You can't dare to criticize anything that has From Software's name on it, even if you overall like the game. I have an overall mixed opinion on this game, and unfortunately it's been a disappointment. That's not to say that the game is terrible by any means. It is a good game that is ultimately bogged down by poor design decisions such as the drip-fed content philosophy and its over-reliance on boss fights. Regardless, I can recommend this game at $40 or some sort of sale price from the $60, which is what it should have been to begin with. Either way, let's hope for more positive reviews in the future. Thank you guys for watching as always, and this is Powerhouse, signing off.